Welcome back, hunters. Sky Sensei here with another weapons video. I'm still working on a sword and shield guide for you guys, so keep an eye out for that later this month. But for now, for those of you who do use sword and shield or looking to try it out, I thought I'd drop a fun build for you guys that honestly I've been missing out on, and it's great damage. FrostCraft on sword and shield is so much fun, and it's honestly a good change in terms of playstyle than most other weapons. So particularly here, I'll be showing a build that is not honestly meta build, but they are quite fun and still very strong to use, albeit it will be a little bit more specific in terms of monsters that it's useful against. So for those of you who aren't aware, FrostCraft is actually a perk that comes from the Valkana armor set. It basically boosts your attack for a few melee hits after drawing your weapon. Speaking specifics here, you get roughly a 25% boost in attack in the first gauge, 20% in the second, and 5% in the third, and then you return to base weapon damage. Now, I'm not 100% sure on those numbers, but after a couple of tests, it was roughly around there, which essentially means that only the first two gauges are actually really useful. If you're going constantly below that or even hitting back to base damage, it's not worth using this Valkana set for. So, as I mentioned before, that is going to change your playstyle with this weapon. For the first two gauges, it only really takes a couple of melee hits to return, so given that, this perk is only useful on a set number of weapons, either A, that don't have too many attacks like a greatsword, or B, can be sheathed really quickly and have high mobility gameplay like sword and shield. Now, being completely honest, I totally forgot about this perk when Iceborne first dropped, but going back, it's been a ton of fun, and now it actually has decent damage when you combine it with the Raging Braikido set. So let me jump into the build, and I'll discuss the variations about what you can change on your gameplay to make this sword and shield build work. So the build that I have here is a 3-piece Valkana, 2-piece Braiky with a Saphi weapon which has a Valkana Divinity Augment. This gives me access to all the armor bonuses that we want, including the Braiky Agitator secret. Since FrostCraft boosts raw damage, adding Braiky just made sense to get even more attack on this build to maintain your high DPS. This build only works though with the Saphi when you augment with Valkana Divinity, since FrostCraft requires 4 Valkana pieces, so taking one onto the weapon lets you sneak in Braiky's secret. The other perk that you get with this is the 2-piece Valkana, which is actually critical element, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. The remaining jewels on this build are really to max out critical damage. Expert, critical boost, tenderizers are all needed since sword and shield really relies on critical damage for its high numbers. Okay, quickly going back to the weapon. Saphi weapons in general, overall they have great attack, while they have element is low. Thus, for this build, you'll want to max out the augments for the rest for attack and sharpness to max out your effective raw damage. This is definitely more worth it since you are running FrostCraft and Agitator Secret, it makes the weapon quite lethal. That being said, you still have an element, and I still think it's worthwhile to make different weapons for each element, particularly because you have critical element on the build. It's not worth wasting that. On the flip side though, pushing all element augments isn't terrible, but I found that you just lose too much attack and it becomes too specific to the monsters that only have high element hit zones. So in the end, you're going to need a mix. My solution to this was to max out the element damage on the charm and jewels while maintaining the attack boosts on the augments. The extra 100 element that you get and the 20% on top of that is quite a bit, and enough bonus for you to make this weapon effective against element weak monsters without giving up too much base attack. So roughly summarizing that, this build is pretty effective against element weak monsters. If you're looking for a more general build though, just ignore the critical element and place an attack charm and replace 2 jewels with attack jewels. Again, the attack is great, and for the most part, most monsters this will actually be really effective, but for those that are element weak specific, you're losing out on the bonus element damage which comes from critical element. Now, in terms of playstyle, it definitely is a more run and gun kind of style where you will be sheathing your weapon quite a bit, repositioning, attacking a few times, sheath and reposition and repeat. Now this may sound inefficient, but honestly if done right, it's actually quite effective since sword and shield stores weapons at lightning speed. Additionally, this build actually has quick sheath 3 built in, so it's super quick to just sheath your weapon and run around. If you aim your strongest draw attack at the right location every hit, you're honestly getting quite a bit of damage. Compared to regular sword and shield, the only thing you'll have to be aware of is to avoid falling into the trap of continuously putting out damage instead of repositioning. The last note for FrostCraft that I want to talk about, in order to maximize damage, any big openings such as knocks, staggers, wallbangs, use the Perfect Rush first. Perfect Rush has quite a few hits and you want to use the most of the FrostCraft bonus damage, which is essentially the first 2 gauges. Now the best way to do this from a sheath is to guard right next to the tendered part, which then pulls your weapon out but doesn't waste a FrostCraft, and then immediately move into a backstep followed by the Perfect Rush initiation. So if executed properly, you'll only be using the first 2 bars of your FrostCraft, which gets you the max damage. Now on that point of weak points as well, this build does require tenderized parts and enraging the monster in order to reach 100% affinity. So throughout the hunt, you'll have to balance between damaging, tendering the highest element weak zone, and ensuring the monster is always enraged. Out of those 3, usually tendering is the hardest one for most weapons, but Sword and Shield has a great weakening mechanic with the Clutch Claw. Essentially, any roll you do with your weapon out will instantly let you Clutch Claw towards the end of the roll, and that is a 1 clutch weaken. So for a light weapon, you don't need to do 2 Clutch Claws to weaken. If you use this roll, it makes it so much more effective and much easier to maintain 100% affinity using Sword and Shield. The extra bonus with the Clutch Claw is that your weapon actually counts as being put away, so you restore your FrostCraft while weakening. It's almost as if the developers planned it that way. I will point out once again here that when you tenderize a part, be sure to tender the area that is weakest to your element. Since this build isn't max DPS, you have to make sure that you're targeting those weak elements in order to take advantage of critical element. So overall, it's a really fun build which maintains high DPS but changes up the playstyle. I've been having a lot of fun with it solo or group hunts. It's quite refreshing. It's a great intro into Sword and Shields if you haven't learned Sword and Shield properly. It makes you use the Clutch Claw mechanics and lets you learn the quick mobility playstyle. So yeah, let me know guys in the comments below for anything else as well. Be sure to comment if I missed anything or if there's anything I should add to this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Can't wait to hear what you guys have on this highly underrated weapon, honestly. Till next time, hunters, stay safe and keep hunting. Sky Sensei is out.